Hello everybody and welcome back to today's video. And in today's video we would be looking at African literature and certain previous year questions from African literature. So I will be doing all of these videos in two languages, in English as well as in Tamil. So we'll start with our first set of PYQs on African literature. Yes, identify the post-apartheid novel by Nadine Gordimer. So Nadine Gordimer, like you all know, is a Nobel laureate and she's from South Africa. So most of her novels concern the apartheid movement. And the question is identify this work that is based on the post apartheid uh, times. Yeah? So you have The Conservationist, The House Gun, The Lying Days, and Burger's Daughter. And the answer is The House Gun. The House Gun has all to do with the post apartheid times. Now, before we move to the next question, some more about Narayan Gaudimer. Narayan Gaudimer and all these works are quite significant from the point of view of your examination as well. So, if you look at The Conservationist, just a second. Yes, so The Conservationist has Mehring as the protagonist, and he is actually a racist white man who has a 400 acres farm. Now, the entire novel is about how he realizes the importance of life and how he sort of changes. And there's a dead body that he discovers in his own field, and that sort of changes his mind. So, that is the story of The Conservationist. And you also have The Lying Days. The Lying Days is sort of a Bildungsroman. And Lying Days is the debut novel of Godimer, and it was published in the year 1953. And The Conservationist was published in the year 1974. And The Lying Days is, like I told you, it is also semi-autobiographical, and it deals with the life of Helen Shaw. And then you have Burger's Daughter. Burger's Daughter is about Rosa Burger, who is the daughter of the Burgers. Now, the Burgers were actually involved in this movement against the apartheid. So, she is under a sort of a societal pressure wherein people think that she should also be an activist like the others, but then she's different, and then she moves to another place. And finally, she realizes that she belongs to South Africa and then comes back. So, that is The Burger's Daughter. And Burger's Daughter was published in the year 1979. Now, talking about The House Gun, which is actually the right answer here. House Gun actually is set in Johannesburg. Yeah, so it is set in 1996 Johannesburg, and this work, The House Gun, was actually published in the year 1998. Yeah, it was published in the year 1998, The House Gun, and it actually deals with a couple, Harold and Claudia. Now, Harold and Claudia, they have a son who's Duncan, and Duncan murders a person. So the entire novel is set against this backdrop, wherein the couple live in post-apartheid Africa, and they sort of turn towards religion. Harold turns towards Catholicism for respite, for rest, and Claudia turns towards Freud. Yeah, she turns towards Freud, and Harold turns towards Catholicism. So that is a gist about the house guns and all of these novels. So I think you must read a little bit more about all of these other novels as well, because these are quite important from the point of view of the examination as well. Yeah. Having said that, we'll go to the next question. J.M. Coetzee was the first writer to be awarded the Booker Prize twice. He won the prize for two of his works. So you're supposed to find out which two of his works won the Booker Prize. Yeah. And the answer is Life and Times of Michael Kay and Disgrace. So these are two works for which he won the Nobel Prize. Now, talking about his first work, which is Dusk Lands. Dusk Lands is his debut novel, which was published in the year 1974. And Disgrace, of course, which is something that is very, very famous. It has all to do with the 15-year-old protagonist who is David Lowry. Yeah. Now, Dusklands itself has two stories in it. Two stories in the sense one is the Vietnam Project, and the next is the narrative of Jacobus Coetzee. Yeah, the narrative of Jacobus Coetzee. So these are the two stories, Vietnam Project and the narrative of Jacobus Coetzee. These are two parts or sections of the Dusklands. So that is his debut work. And then you also have Four. Four is something that is sort of a retelling of Daniel Defoe's Robinson Crusoe. Yeah, so it's sort of a retelling, or from a different point of view, you look at Four. So Four is basically a post-colonial novel by J.M. Coetzee, which was published in the year 1986. So it was published in the year 1986, Four. And you have Daniel Defoe also. And this novel basically revolves around Susan Barton. Yeah, Susan Barton, who's in search of her missing daughter. So that's how it starts. And Burton, she sort of seeks out to Foe. Foe is actually a reference to Daniel Defoe. And she asks his help in order to complete her story. Yeah. And then he says that, yeah, now writing about travel and about Robinson Crusoe and all of it seems to be a very, very dull idea. So that's what he says. So that is Four by Robinson Crusoe. Now, talking about these two significant works, Life and Times of Michael Kay and Disgrace. Life and Times of Michael Kay is a novel that was published in the year 1983, and Disgrace was published in the year 1999. So he won the prize, the Booker Prize, for these two works, which is Life and Times of Michael Kay and Disgrace. All right, a little bit more about these works. The Life and Times of Michael Kay, it won the Booker in the year 1983. All right, and Disgrace, which was published in 1999, also won the Booker Prize that year. Now, this is actually the story of Michael Kay, a person named Michael Kay, who's actually the protagonist. And he takes up this arduous, difficult journey from Cape Town to his mother's rural birthplace. And that is set during an imaginary civil war. Now, the novel is actually split into three parts. So it deals with themes of survival, isolation, dignity, and how society influences or impacts individuals who belong to the society. So that also is another important component of Life and Times of Michael Kay. And then, of course, you have his very, very famous and critically acclaimed novel, which is Disgrace, which was which actually revolves around, like I told you, David Laurie. David Laurie is somebody who has to uh, navigate his way through his sexual desires, his age, and he's becoming old now, and he actually it is actually sort of from a third person limited point of view. It is not that the narrator is omniscient and knows everything that's happening, but it is set from a very very limited point of view. So the themes are probably apartheid, and then it also discusses sexual relationships, because you see David Laurie getting involved with his own student. Yeah. So, and of course, he has many, many affairs. He meets a prostitute as well quite often. And that is Soraya. He meets Soraya. And every Thursday evening, he has this 19-minute meeting with her. So, you find David Laurie to be a very, very uh, scandalous person, we could say, because he is somebody who's attracted towards sex and sexuality. So, sexual relationships, of course, form a very, very important part of his life, because he thinks that sexual activity will keep him alive. So, it examines the struggles and hardships that people face in post apartheid, because once he is expelled from his college, he comes back to live with Lucy. Lucy is his daughter, and Lucy is raped. So that sort of sets the plot in motion. Just a minute. And then he comes to, after he is expelled from his college, he comes to live with Lucy. Now, Lucy is raped, and David feels very, very bad about this. So it actually revolves around a lot of these race dynamics, we could say. Yeah. Now, moving on to the next question, which is, and my sincere request is that you learn a little more about all of these works, because they're quite important. Yeah. Now, we're talking about the African trilogy, and you have to arrange all of these works in chronological order. Now, the African trilogy basically consists of all these works, yeah. No Longer at Ease, yeah. It involves these works: No Longer at Ease, Things Fall Apart, and Arrow of God. And of course, you also have Man of the People, which is not a part of the African trilogy, but then it is also an important work by Chinua Achebe. Yeah. Now, if you look at this trilogy, this is the order. Things Fall Apart is the first work that forms part of the trilogy. And then you have No Longer at Ease, and then Arrow of God. So this is the order. So if you were to arrange in that order, you will probably realize that this is the answer. Yeah, this is the answer. Things Fall Apart is this very first novel. All right. Yeah, I'll probably tell you a little more about these works, because they're again sort of important. So, Things Fall Apart is basically a novel that was published in 1958. So, because you need to arrange them in chronological order, I think you can remember probably the years in which these most important works were published. So, it's in 1958 that Things Fall Apart was published, and Things Fall Apart and all of his works, they have something to do with the Igbo tribe in Africa. And Things Fall Apart is about Okonko, who is a wrestler who believes that anger is the only emotion that is worth showing. So that is Things Fall Apart, and you realize how he is expelled from his own tribe, and he feels very guilty for having killed Ikimifuna. Yeah, so if you read the summary, you will get a gist. And then No Longer at Ease is sort of a sequel, because No Longer at Ease is about Okanko's grandson, yeah, that is Obi Okanko. So it's about his grandson Obi Okonko. Now, Obi Okonkwo is actually the protagonist, and it starts with the trial of Obi Okonkwo because he has already received bribe from um a student in order to provide scholarship. So that's how it starts. So that is no longer at ease. And then you have Arrow of God. Arrow of God is about Izulu. Yeah, Izulu is the chief priest. And if you see all of these novels, they actually sort of talk about how colonialism has robbed the colonized of their religion. Because you see, Christian missionaries uh, holding a very, very important part because they sort of disrupt the entire functioning of the tribe. And then this work, Man and the People, is a satirical novel because you see, after independence, after having received independence, you see, Africa was sort of backward simply because of the corrupt politicians. So you see, in Man of the People, a post-colonial Nigeria being shown, and Odili is a school teacher who is against Nanga. Nanga is sort of the corrupt politician who has many political connections, and that is how he portrays that Nigeria is corrupt and it continues to be corrupt even after the colonizers have left. Yeah, so that is these three works. The next thing is probably this, wherein we look at swamp dwellers. Now, the question is just this: Swamp Dwellers is actually a work by Ol Soyinka. Okay, Ol Soyinka or Ole Soyinka. Now, this work is basically about what is the question. Now, swamp dwellers, yes, now swamp dwellers is about a group of people who are living as a community. Now, this is the answer. It talks about the migration of people crossing borders and diasporic anguish. Now, it is actually swamp. Swamp itself is a reference to um, dirt and things like that. So it's about people who are living in a swamp, yeah, and they struggle for survival. So you see, this particular work talks about migration, about uh, crossing of borders, how you actually shift from one place to another and you feel out of place. And it also talks about the impact of modernization on traditional ways of life. Because having the modernism set in, you think sort of uh, the traditional ways of life are all no more relevant. Yeah. So these are sort of the themes that are discussed in the Swamp Dwellers by Wole Soyinka. Now, Wole Soyinka has received the Nobel Prize in the year 1986. Now that could also be a question. And one more thing that you should remember is Chinua Achebe, who is sort of a very, very important, significant writer as far as African literature is concerned, has not received the Nobel Prize. Now we looked at J.M. Coetzee, Nadine Gordimer, Chinua Achebe, and Wole Soyinka. Of all the four, who is the one person who hasn't received the Nobel Prize is Chinua Achebe. Chinua Achebe hasn't received the Nobel Prize. Yeah, so that's something that you should keep in mind. And he's the first person. Wole Soyinka is probably the first person in Africa and diaspora to be honored with the Nobel Prize. And after that, you had the others also receiving the Nobel Prize, but Chinua Achebe did not receive it at all. Yeah. So yeah, with that we come to the end of today's video. I will meet you in another interesting lecture. Thank you.